I didn't grow up in poverty, but I certainly inherited a poverty mindset. There was plenty of money for alcohol and never enough for groceries. My family had an inconsistent and often volatile emotional relationship with spending. Money was always an issue, so I naturally became the child who defended himself against potential conflict by conveniently choosing the cheapest thing on the menu and feeling instantly apprehensive if I received an expensive birthday gift because I knew it would be used as emotional leverage further down the line. My story isn't unique because financial trauma is exceptionally common but often very repressed. Rarely do we want to look behind the curtain of all of those painful memories and all of those arguments, all of those abusive instances for some people where money played a big part in the pain. But if we're going to move towards a more financially secure future, if we're going to create a genuinely abundant relationship with money, and not just in a hippie money manifestation mindset kind of way, I mean genuinely be able to create wealth, you're gonna need to resolve your money trauma. So today we're going to be addressing this question about financial apprehension and what we can do with it. I've got a two-part response dealing with imagined apprehension and actual financial insecurity. The second half of the question is obviously, if you haven't got much money, then try and find a way to actually have money. But generally speaking, this video is going to be about what do we do in terms of the emotional, psychological blockage, which generally congests us and often has a hell of a lot of baggage all around the places that we just don't want to look into. In fact, I'll be honest with you to start this video off, I'm still working through my money trauma. I'm still working through my poverty mindset, and although this year I'm projected to comfortably earn 6 figures in revenue before tax, I still have certain elements of my memory that surprise me, in fact. Kind of embarrassing to share. But I'll be real. I was recently in a client call, I think last week, and we were talking about money and spending and wealth, and it was a wonderful conversation. And I suddenly remembered how I used to have to ask for permission to get food from the fridge as a child. I remembered that there would be consequences and punishment if a yogurt or a candy went missing, and certain memories of lying awake in bed at night as a small child, with my stomach growling because I didn't eat enough at dinner, and not wanting to get up out of bed and tiptoe down the stairs in case I got caught, and the punishment for getting caught wouldn't be worth the candy bar. And yet sometimes I think as I got a little bit older I started to rebel, and I have memories of taking a Kit Kat, or actually it's always a Kit Kat, literally a Kit Kat. I have a memory of taking a Kit Kat from the bottom shelf in the chocolate cupboard, putting it in my pocket, sneaking back upstairs, not eating it that moment, but then saving it until the next day so that I could dump the wrapper in the school bins rather than it being found in the bin at home. That's financial trauma. That's also a dysregulated family environment with a whole series of issues related to a whole variety of problematic spaces, but you can see that the money element and the spending element is a crucial aspect of the general fog of childhood memory. Many people who have financial trauma can relate to stories like this. There's a feeling of being guilty when you receive, a feeling of maybe getting a gift that's a little bit too expensive for your tastes and feeling like you need to give it back. There's a feeling of money not coming easily to you, or feeling that money is meant for other people rather than yourself. So how can we actually move beyond these very limited narratives and heal that apprehension about finance? Crucially, it requires every aspect of trauma work that I've spoken about on this channel before. We need to do the somatic nervous system cleansing, we need to do the imaginal inner child work, and we need to go into the upper echelons of the transpersonal space to contact something like our colloquial higher self. But that's a lot of hours of work. For the sake of this video, financial apprehension can be solved in 2 ways. Number 1, you need to literally have money. It's all very well and good me saying that these are all the ways that you can psychologically unravel your poverty mindset, but if you are literally struggling to pay the bills and you are living paycheck to paycheck and you haven't got a career, an entrepreneurial path, or another avenue of consistently saving and creating wealth for yourself, there's no amount of inner work that's going to be able to make you feel good about a situation that isn't real. You're always going to be financially apprehensive if you know that you're not earning enough based on what you need to survive. There's a question and a possibility of lowering your expenses, but this isn't the financial management channel. We're doing trauma work, we're looking at the psychology of trauma and financial instability in particular. But please, if you just do not have enough money and there are ways for you to be able to YouTube how to earn more money or how to get more money, how to ask for a raise, how to do whatever you need to do to actually get your money to a level where it's genuinely safe, please do that in addition to what we're going to talk about in this video. There's no psychological bypassing of money manifestation magic, of I am a money magnet and money comes to me easily, if you're literally earning minimum wage and you've got massive credit card bills. You're not going to be able to manifest your way out of literal poverty. However, let's imagine that you've got enough money, or maybe you're at a stage in your career where you've actually even got money in the bank. It's not something where it's true wealth. You're not a territory where you can do whatever you want with your life, but you've got some money and you notice these elements of, I'm still choosing to go for the cheapest food in the grocery store. I'm still choosing to go for secondhand clothing, and I really feel apprehensive about investing in something like therapy or business mentoring or creative mentoring or any kind of access to services which are not necessary. That's the number one indication that I noticed in my own life in regards to the legacy of financial trauma, this inherited parental mindset about what money is for and what money isn't for. Because if you're anything like me, you grew up in a family narrative of that's for other people. A good example, like in the UK, we have class divisions: working class, middle class, upper class. It's different in different parts of the world, but very much in terms of a sport context, for example, football, that's very working class and middle class, but primarily a working class accessible thing. But something like golf or something like cricket or something like even rugby to a certain degree, they all indicate that there's more of a class distinction. And because my father was a football kind of man, my only option was football. And I didn't really like football, so there was no other option possibly presented. And this class mentality of maybe I really wanted to get into golf, not only was that not a cultural possibility in his mind, there's the financial element of buying golf clubs and being able to afford those things like organized sport and not being able to go on the field trips, not being able to join in with things that would naturally be interesting for you as a child. They're all financial traumas. And we continue these legacies as an adult where we could literally have, imagine this, imagine you're a person who literally has $10,000, $20,000 in the bank and you're making a purchasing decision between the $30 trainers and the $100 trainers. You know that the $100 trainers are going to really support your sport. They're going to significantly improve your performance because they're a specialist shoe based. Let's imagine it's climbing, right? You need a pair of climbing shoes. You can't go climbing and expect to be good at climbing without actual climbing shoes, but somehow you're still going to make do with the beat up Vans that you got 4 years ago from a thrift shop because you refuse to spend the money on something which is non-essential. That's a small version of financial trauma, and it's catching certain moments like this and just stepping back and going, this is ridiculous. I've got this much money in the bank. This means something really important to me. This learning how to climb in this example, that means something to me. That feels exciting. That feels like what I want to be doing with my time. I deserve to spend this money on myself. For someone who's gone through financial trauma or grown up in a poverty mindset, there's usually a hell of a lot of repression about what you're worth, because we were taught as children by father, mother, family, and maybe even the society that we're in, that we are not worth a certain monetary standard of material goods. Families have narratives, families have stories. We're a family that only shops at Lidl, Aldi, the discount stores, right? Not the I don't know, the different parts of the country, but say Whole Foods in America or Waitrose in the UK, the more expensive grocery stores, we don't even step foot in those stores. And then what's very interesting is that if you don't peel back those narratives, you'll find yourself as an adult still not going into certain stores or certain experiences when shopping, or even allowing yourself to conceptualize something like therapy or coaching or business mentoring or spending money on a service or a product which would indicate that you are indeed worth spending on. People don't get therapy if it's such a sad situation. Many people who have financial trauma will not only not get therapy because it's a bit of an expensive issue, they literally cannot afford the therapist's rate. It's more a case that they could afford the therapist's rate, but they don't feel that they're worthy of spending that much money on themselves. But if their friend or their mother or their cousin asked for that same fee to be borrowed to them because they were going through financial difficulty and they just maxed out their credit card, this kind of financial trauma of giving to other people before you give to yourself, that's a way of offsetting the attention of maybe a moment when you were 6 or 7, had money spent on you and you became the focus of attention because, don't take it for granted, that's a lot of money. And you're like, oh, I just don't even want this responsibility, just take it. I don't want money. This is a person who cannot hold on to money. They just give it away and give it away and give it away because they can't hold the possibility of what they could use that money for. The identity is so fixed in a poverty, scarcity consciousness. There's many ways that I could take this conversation in terms of specific examples, but the fundamental pattern that you need to start withdrawing from the world is this idea of low self-worth and money being something which isn't meant for you. Please don't go into the grandiose money manifestation mindset of believing that you are worthy of millions without any tangible skills that could give back to the world. It is infantile, juvenile, and will not work. You might have a get-rich-quick scheme on a crypto pump or find out how to do drop shipping or scam your way into some kind of product deal. That won't resolve the feeling of financial trauma because a few years later, you will have the 6 figures in savings, you will have the luxury car, you'll have whatever you need, and you'll still have that financial trauma that leads men and women in their 30s and 40s to pursue more and more and more, and the game just gets bigger and bigger. So rather than the $1,000 they need to give to the friend, it's the 10 million which goes towards a shady investment, and they just unconsciously self-sabotaged. Even if you're very financially affluent, if you don't peel back the poverty foundation, you will be tainted by that same line of thinking, and there's only so far that you can push that out into the future. I don't want you to earn money and then lose the money because there's a part inside of you or a projected parental voice which is whispering, yeah, but it's not really yours. You're not really worth it. It's gonna go. It's gonna go. It's gonna go. Look, it's gone. Any kind of internalized thinking around that style, that it's very theatric. I was just playing around with it. But there's often that voice inside of people who are earning money for the first time, who haven't healed their poverty mindset, haven't healed the financial trauma. They're still responding to the internalized father or the internalized mother or the internalized cultural narrative, maybe growing up in a working class environment where you see many different situations of, I can't think of so heavily repressed in my mindset because I've moved myself from, first person in my family to go to university, first person to do anything entrepreneurial, first person to even have an interest in reading books and learning and self-developing. There's so many stages of moving forwards and honoring your potential and practicing self-worth and self-respect by getting ahead that naturally we repress certain elements of our childhood. I loathed the culture that I grew up in. This football, layabout, get messed up on alcohol and substances kind of culture. I felt like it was just an absolute waste of time. And yet, of course, I participated in it because what's the alternative? There wasn't another alternative presented. I wasn't even given the option that I could read books to get better or learn things because I never saw anyone reading books in my family environment. There's a poverty of the mind element as well, right? It's not just financial poverty, it's poverty of insight, poverty of potential, poverty of spiritual depth, poverty of emotional depth. That word poverty can go into so many lanes of our identity that if you really want to go deep on the financial trauma element, you also want to complement it with spiritual trauma and the other elements of basically not believing that you're worth very much. I hope this video has brought up a few ideas. In terms of practical suggestions, you can start reading books like The Millionaire Next Door and $1 Million Consulting, which is useful for any coaches or teachers and just healing your money issues. I've read dozens and dozens of business books over the years. I remember about 10 years ago listening to Rich Dad, Poor Dad on audiobook, and if you're in that kind of hustle stage where you realize, okay, I can make money for myself, it's very enjoyable. It's very exciting. But don't think that the actual learning and the book reading and the business itself will solve the unresolved bleeding scar, which is being a little boy or a little girl who is consistently given the message that money isn't meant for them, and that money, by proxy, is a form of love, a form of attention, a form of safety, crucially. And if safety wasn't meant for you, and that remains coded in your nervous system, you will keep finding many tangential ways to prove that to yourself. To some degree, if we follow the money wound all the way through, we find the abusive relationship with the partner who disrespects us. We find the abusive situation with the boss who disrespects us. And we find the addiction which devitalizes us and leads us to harming our own body, becoming overweight, underweight, becoming drugged out, becoming basically a shell of the self-esteem that we could have if we traced back these patterns towards the lack of safety that we experienced as a child. We do get to create that safety for ourselves as adults. We do get to earn the money that we need to have the life that we want, but we need to understand that sometimes for people who weren't raised in the best family environments, it requires creating a hell of a lot of emotional distance from the stories which were untrue and yet sadly very reinforced. I could make this video a whole hour or two about certain moments that I had. For example, the routine memory of going food shopping with my mum, going and spending as little as possible, finding a way to spend 5 pence less on this tin of beans, going to the reduced section and getting the almost out-of-date bread, doing all the things to get the bill as low as possible. And no matter what would happen, the routine would be to drive back home, pull up on the drive, father would be there at the door, hand out, ready to receive the receipt. Why were the beans 29 pence? That whole narrative. That's the culture that I grew up in. It's not my father's fault in particular. It's not your father's fault in particular, or your mother. It's the limited ideology that they were given and what they needed to survive and how they decided to, just piece themselves together in a very hostile world in terms of making do and having enough money to get by and feeding their children and doing what they can based on whatever consciousness they had. But we do not need to either point the finger or attach onto those narratives when that moment kind of awakens in your mind. That's not mine. That's not my story. It's not my story at all. And gladly, at this point in my life, I spend a hell of a lot of money on organic food and supplements and high quality water, and the majority of money that I do spend goes right back into my self-investment in terms of education and in terms of literal nourishment with the food that I know I deserve, and it's definitely been well worth it. And of course, my earning potential has continued to increase as I've continued to break that pattern via the action of choosing to spend money on things that I wasn't allowed or encouraged to spend money on when I was a kid. Bit of a cliche, kind of like, ooh, you can see my angry fist pattern, but if you've grown up in this environment and you know you're deserving of more, I can relate to that. I can really relate to it. It is possible. There are many ways to approach this. Fundamentally, trace back the poverty from all the areas of your life and start to bring in wealth. Wealth in the true sense. Emotional wealth, spiritual health. Finances are a part of it. Fundamentally, know you are worth it. Know you deserve more, and put in the effort and the action and the structure to genuinely receive that money via a skill that you can provide. Things get a lot better. I hope that's helped. Fundamentally, financial apprehension, which is usually a blockage in the mind. There are also practical things that we can do. It's up to you to decide what they are. Maybe my story was useful. Maybe it just felt like a trauma dump. I hope not, but share your stories down in the comments and maybe it will inspire someone else. I definitely could have used some of that inspiration about 10 years ago when I didn't understand just how deep those roots run. Maybe you can share a particularly, distinct memory, and you'll be like, this is a memory that only I had, and then we all kind of share the isolated fragments and start to unblock that unconscious overlay of, shh, don't talk about it, don't talk about the receipt, don't talk about the choosing the cheapest item on the menu, don't talk about the being scared that the birthday gift would be used against you. We all have memories like this, shameful memories that we keep to ourselves, and maybe the comment section on this video is a good place to share. Or you can keep it to yourself and work through it in your own timing. Nonetheless, I appreciate your attention, and here's the next video. We'll be talking about more topics, more depth, and more variety. I'll see you over there.